Okay.
When we did the technical install the other day, we went in and created the Easy Security company. We went in and added a few source tables, and the field level and data security rely on changing the code on the pages, and that's how it actually technically works underneath. It will add code, same as a programmer normally will do. It will just do it for all fields, all pages, with a wizard in here. So only those tables that are in here would be able to be controlled with this extra level. The other thing is, of course, if you don't run the process, nothing works, of course, because the code changes are missing in there. But as we created this setup inside the Easy Security company, when we looked at login and permissions yesterday, we were basically maintaining everything inside the Easy Security company, and then we were publishing. What we will do with this part of the solution is we will keep a lot of the setup in here, but we will really be able to do some of it inside the individual companies. And depending on how we do the setup, it can also use a function to copy data between companies, but you probably want to keep at least some of the information inside the actual company, inside NAV in here. So I want to go ahead and switch to another company in my database, and I will select my Kronos North America in here. There's a few steps to be done to enable this company for field level and data security. Basically, you need to open the field level and data security setup and select what company is the Easy Security company, because that's the master company where it's actually going to copy some data from. And then I want to put a check mark in here saying copy from setup company, and it will put some other check marks in, but we will come back to what they mean after we have looked at the application. But basically, after that, I have to run this copy process, and it will simply pull down some information from the Easy Security company that I want to use to assign security within here. But that is the only thing required inside a company, and you don't need to use this application in all companies. You just have it the places where you really need it, and that's the only thing you will be setting up to copy this information here. As I copied this, I will have seen I moved over some data over here actually. But the idea with this application is that we will be able to control the individual fields on a customer, for example. So I can go in here and control all the fields on the customer card. Yesterday we looked at the normal login and permissions, and those ones allowed us to control if people could change a customer or not, or if they could see one, but we couldn't control the individual fields like the payment terms, for example. All that will be possible with field level. We will also be able to control all the things up in the ribbon, not the technical parts coming from NAV, but all the things coming from the application in here we can control also. And the other part is, of course, we will be able to filter the data, and I will come back and make an example of that also in here. But the first thing I want to do is lock down my customer card. So instead of having access to all fields, I'm going to actually lock down the customer cards pretty hard to begin with in here. And when we looked at it yesterday, you had a user, and that user had a lot of permissions in it. This one is actually a very different setup compared to that one, because we really want to minimize the number of records in here. So one of the things we allow to do is to have the blank user ID. Basically, this will apply to everybody now. And you're also only dealing with one table at a time, another way to actually get a much better overview of what's going on in here. But I got this read-only code, and it is set up as the default. So if I now go back and look at my list of customers, I will see that all my menu items now gray out up here. And if I go look at a single customer, all the fields in here is grayed out. So I can't change anything any longer. It is basically completely locked down for me in here. I'm now going to make exceptions for the people that are different, and I'll make a direct assignment to myself in here, but it is actually also possible to use groups, and I will go use that a little later in here. But as I assign access for myself in here, I can leave the field level security code blank out here. That means everything will show up completely normal in here. But I can also create a new one, and I'll create a new one that allow me to see the address information, for example. And I have a default in here. The read-only is created automatically, and you see them in your system also, and it's actually marked as a default. And if you want to do something restrictive, you can actually start by copying that one. So I'm going to select that one. Each page that is showing the customer table can actually be controlled individually. But again, you can also do page 0 to minimize the amount of records. And by default in here, the read-only basically made every page view in here, and that's why it showed up the way it did actually. But I can go in and select my customer card, and I'll make my customer card editable out here. You want to leave the page itself editable if you want to be able to control the fields being editable. If you make the page view, you can only hide the fields. You can't really make fields back to editable again. The other thing we can do is take away certain pages in the system. So if I only need limited access, I probably don't want people to see the customer statistics. So I'm going to hide that page. This one is kind of similar to the object level security we did yesterday, but of course this one you're only dealing with one table at a time in here. I will look at the customer card and take a look at the details in here. And same way as we did for pages, we also allow field 0, basically every field in the system. And again, your options are edit, view, and hide out here. So since the page is editable, I'm actually going to make every field in here view, basically gray them out. I will then go either add individual fields or use the function up here where I can actually add multiple one at the same time. So I'll just add a few things about the address in here. And I want to make those editable. So these 5 fields are now editable, and everything else is actually view in here. We can also hide information. So all the things about balance, I maybe don't want people to see that if they should only be dealing with address, same as I want to take away the statistics. I can select all those fields and hide them in here. So at this point, I really only have 10 records in here, but there's hundreds plus table or fields on that table. So all of them are handled by the default, and I only make the things that are different in here. You don't need to have a default. You can leave everything normal and only hide a few fields if you needed to, for example. The other thing we can deal with is all the things up here in the ribbon, and that's what we refer to as actions in here. And again, I want to do a default so I don't have to deal with all of them. And I'll actually simplify the page quite a lot in here. So I'll go in here and make all my actions hidden in here. I can then select the one I want people to have access to, maybe the contacts, statistics, comments, ledger entries, and ship to addresses down here. And I want to make those editable. Editable mean you can click on them. But you can also make these view in here if you wanted to. That will basically gray out now one menu item. So I'm hiding a lot of things in here, and I will make only a few things that people can click on in here. You can also go hide field on the blank page, for example. So since I'm actually going to hide all the balance fields, I may be going to do that also for all other pages in here. So I'm not going to do anything else with the fields. but I would just go in and select these 4 balance fields, and I'll actually go in here and hide them. So you don't need a default, you don't need a lot of other things, but you can take the few things and take away in here. One of the things it's pretty commonly used for is actually to hide the cost fields on sales line items and things like that one. In this way, you can actually make it quite easy in here. But I created this new address field level security code in here, and I'm going to apply that to myself in here. As I now go open up my customer, I would see that I used to have some balance fields and they are now gone. I have a few fields that are editable in here. I can't change payment terms, but I can change the address and phone number as I select it. And if I look at my ribbon, it's very limited up here. Some of them are grayed out, and even if I click on statistics, it just tells me I can't open that page basically. So this one is kind of similar to the object level security, but it's of course a lot more granular because you can apply it to a single user if you wanted to in here. This principle can be applied everywhere. So the same functionality as I used in here can be used for order processing. And that is one of the things that are actually tricky with the normal NAV permissions, because a sales order is using the sales header and the sales line for the information in here. But that's also going to be the same information you use for a credit memo. And in that way, it's really hard only to deal with data. And if you end up dealing with objects, you can make it so people can't get to the card of a credit memo, but that's really not that useful anyway. But you can make one of those ones with field level security. The credit memo page will be read-only. The sales orders, you can change a few fields, and you maybe want people to change more fields on the quotes, for example. So all this one can be very granular decided in this way also. This functionality about field level and action security basically applies everywhere. There's a few places where it doesn't work that well in here. One of those are actually on the statistic pages, and I just took away all my menu items, so I can't really get in there. But a lot of times on statistic pages, you're not really showing a field on there. What you're showing is actually a variable. And when you notice the setup, we're dealing with the fields in here. We have an FAQ that talks about how you can actually associate a variable with a field. And as you hide the field, those fields will be hidden also, of course. But that's one thing to be aware of. It's especially on statistic pages. It can be necessary that you simply hide the whole page if you want to hide a lot of the information on that. The other part of this solution is the ability to actually limit access to records in here. And in my case, I will actually set up a scenario here with the location code where I can see I have different locations in here, yellow, blue, green, and so on in here. If my normal users really only works in the blank and the blue one, I can go in and apply data security for this one in here. It's quite a similar concept to the field level security in here. It always deals with one table, and you'll be dealing with the individual fields in here. So I'll go for my customer table. I'll go make one here that is called location in here. And I will apply the same filter everywhere. So I will do that filter for page 0 in here. I can then go add my field, and I'll find my location code down here. And I can make filters that are hidden. Users can't see them, and there's no way to get around them. But I can also make editable filters. Those ones are more kind of helpful. The user can get rid of them if they wanted to in here. But I want to go in and add my filter in here, and I will add the blank or the blue location out here. So in that way, I will only see those ones in here. I also want to help people a little. So instead of actually go in and have everything being shown, including all these blocked customers all the time, I will make a filter on the blocked not being set. And in that way, I will only see those ones initially, and I can remove the filter. I could put in the 2 single quotes for the blank value. If I was going to use, for example, the value ship in there, it is not a good idea to have this as text strings in here, because this text will be different for different languages, and you maybe don't plan on using it, but you never know if somebody actually would switch to a different language. So if you use the integer value out here, you can actually in that way be independent of language. So finding out what number it is, you can basically go see and test it out, or you can look in the codes. The first option is 0, and then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. But I created my data security code, and I want to go ahead and apply that. And you do that in the user security setup as anything else in here. So I will go select my location in here, and both for myself and everybody else, be able to filter based on this one. So as I now go back to my list of customers, I only see the blue, the blank, and nothing else in here. I have a filter up here for my blocked being the first value in here. And I can go ahead and remove that or any other filter in here. But I'm not going to get around the blank and blue one, because it's basically a hidden filter and the user can't get around it in here. The other thing we can do is having filters that are specific for a certain page, for example. I can go in here and say I have a salesperson code PS in here, and I maybe only want to open up the cards for the one where I'm actually the salesperson on, for example, and in that way only be able to edit the customer in here. The other thing I did, I actually ended up hard coding this filter. And if you have a lot of combination, you end up with a lot of data security codes. We have something in our application that we actually call a user filter. This is a record that has a user ID and basically a whole list of dimensions in NAV in here. I want to create a new one, and the same way as everywhere else, we allow the blank user ID to have a default in here. One of the main reasons for having a blank user ID is, by the way, when you create a new user, you don't have to remember to do something to lock it down. You have to remember to do something to open up. And that's the whole idea about having the blank user many places, that if you forget to do something, it will be quite restrictive and people can't do anything. I want to add myself in here also, and I will actually go out and map myself to a different location, or 2 different locations, the red or the yellow one in here. We also have department and projects. That's the 2 global dimensions in NAV, so you can also assign those ones. We also have things like responsibility center, posting groups, and many different things out here. We have a total around 30 user-dependent filters out here. You can also map a salesperson or multiple salespeople into a user, also having a individual salesperson as myself right now, or you can have a manager with a list of salespeople, for example, in here. When I assigned my user filter, I need to do a little more to actually make it apply in here, because this application don't really know what fields are for the location code or anything like that one. Basically what you will do is you will go in and instead of the hard-coded value in here, you want to check this box about substituting values. And that means I will now be able to use what we call dynamic filters. This one is basically a little piece of code, and all it's doing is returning a filter in here. You have things related to dates, responsibility centers or fields on the user setup, and all these things called UF for user filter. And one of them down here is the location code that I'll be using. But we also have things related to work date and user ID if you needed to in here. And it's actually quite easy to add more if you're a programmer by simply adding a few lines of code in here. But I want to select this user filter for location, and it's like a variable. It's in percentage sign, so it will be calculated before it actually gets applied in here. So if I now go back to my list of customers, I would see that I now have yellow, red, and blank one in here. And in that way, I have actually allowed myself to see different ones. The other thing I will do in here is actually now limit this page so I can only open up the card if I'm actually the proper user in here. So I will go in and in my data security code again, go to the objects and saying this one is fine for every page in here, but on the customer card, I actually want to have more filtering in here. So I'll go in, and the first thing I want to do is basically copy what I already did for the location for page 0, so I don't have to type all that again. And I probably don't even want people to look at block customers if I'm going to be this restricted in here. Then I'm going to find my salesperson. And again, I want to do a hidden filter. And I want to substitute value. And I'll be using my user filter for the salesperson code down here, my value being the PS in here. So all other pages are limited by the location. The card I will limit also by the salesperson code. So if I go back now, and I open up this 20,000, that is one that have the PS salesperson code, and it all works fine in here. If I try open up another one, it will tell me that that record is not available. It basically falls outside the filter, and it won't allow me to see that, but it will show me the first one that has PS as the salesperson code in here. So in this way, you can also make things that are very specific to individual pages, for example. Also maybe only allow people to see sales orders that has not been released, for example, and things like that one. So this one is really the whole part of this application in here. That's what you can do with it. It can be applied in a lot of ways in here. And of course, if you have a lot of users, you can end up with a lot of user security setups in here. And one of the things we can do is actually build a group in here. And I have set up myself in here, and I can actually make other people use the similar setup in here. So I'll go create what we call a group member, and the person I have set up is a user. And I'll go make my user John use the same setup, and I'll also go have Susan use the same setup in here. So in this way, I have now built a group, and you don't have to have them be exact usernames. You could call them warehouse, sales, and things like that one in here, basically using this setup in here. But as I have now created those groups, we have a function in here where you can look at all user statistics. And if you click on that, then I'll just go filter only for the customer table. I can see that David is using read-only and location because of the default, the blank user ID. John is member of a group, and myself down here is actually the one where it has been assigned in here. You can still override the group. So if I actually go in here and say that I want Susan, in table 18. I don't want any field level or any data security. If I now go back and look at my all user statistics, I would see that because of the direct assignment, it overrules the group in here. So basically, first priority is a direct assignment. After that comes a group, and if there's nothing at all, it will go by the blank user ID being referred to as a default out here. So in this way, you can actually make a lot of things work simply by creating a group without having a lot of individual records in here, even if you end up having quite a large amount of tables, and still override for the few things that are different in here. I created this setup for a single company in here now, my Kronos North America. If I'm going to use this field level security in a different company, it will be necessary for me to actually either export and import these new field level security codes I created, or the other option is you can actually move them back to the Easy Security company. So I'll go back to my Easy Security company and go into my field level security codes. And I can now copy from another company, and it will show me a list of companies and how many unique field level security codes exist. And I can go select this address, and it will copy that information back in here. So this one is now in the Easy Security company, and it will actually in the other company have marked that as coming from the setup company now. And if I was trying to modify it or delete it, it will give me an error and say you can't because it's now coming from the setup company. I can do the exact same thing for my data security codes. So the one about location, I want to actually go ahead and copy that one back to the Easy Security company also in here. The main reason for doing this instead of keeping it inside the individual companies is that if you need this set up for more than one company, it's quite easy now. I'm switched to Kronos Europe. I will go to my field level and data security setup. I will select my Easy Security company and say I want to copy from setup company. And now these extra check marks make sense out here because I can copy field level security setups. That was my code address. I can copy my data security code. That's a location one. The user security setup. I could create records inside the Easy Security company. It's typically used for the blank one or the default. So you would actually have that blank one being copied out of the Easy Security company. You can also copy group members, but if you do that, you're not allowed to create anyone inside each company. The other three parts of the data is allowed to be created local versions of these records also, or extra records in here. So basically now if I run this function about copying data, I'm running it from one of the child companies or the not from the Easy Security company. If I actually go back to the Easy Security company, because now I have two companies that are set up to receive this data, and if I go and run the function to copy data between companies, it will actually update both of them. So at this point, it really works kind of like the publish, but it's doing it by pushing the data out to individual companies out here. One of the things is, of course, I'm a super user in here, and somebody limited me so I can't really see a lot of records. If I know how the setup is done, I could, of course, go change the setup in there, and in that way, give myself full access again in here. And we can actually control security on top of this one in here, where normal NAV security could be used in here, but super users, of course, would be able to go in and change this. We can actually set up access to this application in here. And We do that with something we call login setup. And I'll add myself in here, and I will go put a checkbox out here that I can edit the setup. It basically makes me kind of an administrator of this data in here. And I will then go in and say that Susan, I actually want to delegate to Susan that she can edit the user security setups and the filters and the group members. But I'm really want to controlling the field level and data security codes myself. So she can pick from the one I have created, but she won't be able to create new ones, but still assign security in here. And at this point, I haven't really assigned myself any user security setup in here. You probably want to do that anyway, but I want to show that as an example of how I won't even be able to change my own security in here. To make this extra level of security work on top of the field level and data security setup, you need to go here and check this box about use login setup. And it will now be required that you have a record in the login setup for your user ID to change anything. And if you have a record, it will check that the information you're trying to change, you're actually allowed to in here. So if I go out here and say, no, I want this one to be blanked out because I want full access, it tells me that in the login setup, I don't have the checkbox about editing the user security setup in there. So in this way, even super users can be locked out of this information, so they actually can't change it in here. And you simply do that one by delegating in the login setup who can deal with what part of the data in here. I want to go here and disable that one again, because now it's just normal NAV security. And if you end up, it's all messed up and you don't know the password for the person that he actually can change this, you can, of course, bypass it directly in the SQL database, of course. Yeah. So this one is a part of the application, and the day we actually installed it, we ran the technical install, and I want to just show you one more time what is actually required to do that one in here. The install can only be run from the Easy Security company, and you can overlay objects, you can do anything you want with the objects. As long as you just run this process about implementing the code changes, we will write all the code necessary in here. You should never write this code manually, because it's quite a lot of code that is being added in there, and it's really hard to mimic exactly what we're doing in here. When I selected these source tables, the best approach is to select the few you need up front. If you went in and put 100 in here, and you at the end find out you really only needed 30, that's a lot more things that needs to run, and it takes longer. So it's a better approach to start out with the one you really need, and then go in and add the few that you would need here afterwards. So if I want to actually go in here and deal with some of the purchase side information, I will add 4 tables in here. As I add these tables, I can go out here and take a look at what pages would actually need the modifications in here. And to be able to run this process, we need to export the code to text in here. And you could export all tables and pages. It will work fine. It will just take up some time. We have a function up here where we can actually go in and add something we can filter on in the object designer. So I'll go in and say, I want all the objects to implement in here. And it have now marked a field DBM table number with the value of 5 out here. So I can go in and go to my designer, bring up my filters, and add this DBM table number being 5 in here. We are not going to modify the code on the tables. We will only modify it on the pages, but we need to read some values from the table, so that's why they need to be exported in here. And this one is really a programming task that is going to happen. And if I try to export this one with either a normal customer license or in my case, a demo license, it will tell me I don't have access to run this function in here. So I would need to switch to a partner license to actually be able to run the function to implement the code changes. But it is really also a one-time task that you will do as you actually go in and add more tables. So I'll go back and filter on my DBM table number being 5. And I can now go in and export the objects to text as I need in here. We don't really need to store these objects in a FOB format that is kind of a binary format, but it's a really good thing to always export them into the binary format, because if something goes wrong, we normally don't create any problems with the code we add. It's typically problems that already exist in the code, and you can actually, from the FOB file, easily import a single object. It's also a good idea before you start running this just to go here and compile, and in that way verify that everything actually works as it's supposed to before you actually do anything. But after you have exported the text file, you go select it inside our application. And there's some limitations where this file has to be placed because the service tier will open it directly. But basically, if you run it from the service tier, you place it on a local drive folder, not your documents because it's user specific, but like ctemp, for example, the service tier will be able to get to it. And then all I have to do here is to run implement changes in code, and it will go ahead and go through and read the information from the tables. And if a page is missing some of the code, it will write the code on that page and it will put it into the output file down here. Only pages that need changes would be put in the output. So you can run this as many times as you want, and it would actually only add those pages into the output that need changes in here. So I can see out of my 157 pages, I only had 44 I needed code changes on. We also have a few code units that actually store some settings and are used for filtering and many other things. So we really want to also import those ones in here. But I'll go into my temp folder, find my output text file, and import these pages all related to the purchase side in here. What has happened in here is that we have, of course, made changes to the code in here. And what is normally the best practices is that you would actually add to the version list or change the modify flag. But this code change is very different from normal NAV code changes. It's really to be considered more like adding a language. When you add a language, you can import it and it will change the code quite a lot. But you can also export a language and in that way delete the changes again. And that's really the principle we have modeled this one after in here. So it's completely intentionally, we don't change the modifier and version list. We do change the date and time out here, and that is actually so if you run this one in a test database and you want to move compiled objects into your production environment, you can filter on the one with a date and time in here. The one thing to be really careful about is don't just bring over the pages, because these code units are actually going to be used from the pages. And if you don't bring them over, you won't be able to open or compile the pages actually, because there'll be missing functions in there. So it is possible, and we have a video that actually shows more about this one. But as I now have implemented the code changes on my vendor, if I copy data between companies, my new field level security codes would have been pushed out to the other company. So I can go select my North America. Create a new record in here for the vendor. The read-only was created automatically. And if I now go to my list of vendors, I will of course see that everything was like on my customer card, basically locked down in here. So the important part to understand here is that this one is not something that happens without a code change in here, but the code change happens with a process, and a similar process actually remove the code changes again. So a future upgrade is not really going to be more expensive. It will actually be able to be run with all the normal tools, because we will just pull out all the code changes before you will start the upgrade process in there.